Hey, John. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Before we get into the presentations, I'd like to introduce a new staff, a person we have here in the office in Fort Pierre on the Missouri River System. Mike Greiner has recently joined our staff as a resource biologist out there. He has a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Vermont and then a Master's from South Dakota State. I believe his work there was some of the urban fisheries information that we've shared with the Commission in the past. And for the last 3 years, he's worked at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on salmon and steelhead migrations. And Mike is right back there holding the coffee cup in the vest, and I'm sure over the course of time you'll have a chance to visit with him, and he'll certainly be presenting information before the Commission at some time.
Great. Welcome, Mike.
We have 3 other presentations this morning that have to do with fisheries. The next one has to do with the draft sub-plans on the Black Hills. There's a sub-plan on the small ponds and reservoirs and other ones on streams. And the information that you just saw from Cindy is a key component of the public input process into that. And with that, I'd ask that Jake Davis and Greg Simpson, 2 of our wildlife biologists out on the team that helps manage the Black Hills fisheries, come up and show you where we're at in the process of those Black Hills sub-plans, with the plan being that in about a week or so we'll have a draft to share with the Commission and then go out for public input on.
Okay. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. I'm Greg. This is Jake, 2 of the field biologists, and thank you for taking some time with us this morning to go over some of the work we've been doing on the planning efforts in the Black Hills. To start off a little bit, how all these plans fit together. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about plans, and not just from the aquatic side, but from the terrestrial as well. First, we had that state umbrella plan. That's something that was approved by the Commission about a year ago. And that one of those analogies of that is that's about like that 30,000 foot level thing. It's basically across the state. Because we recognized when we first got into these issues and stuff that we had, there were certain issues that were statewide in nature. AIS would be one example. It affects everything across the entire state. And then when we started going through it, we had 4 different areas, or we call them sub-regions or eco-regions, different terms that we use throughout the whole process. That being the Black Hills, West River, Missouri River, and East River plan. And that's something that you took and approved the different plans at that part about, I believe, last April or so. We took that one step further now through all this. And when we take the Black Hills plan, we really recognize we have 2 different features. This is basically what we've been doing now as an update from 1993, so essentially 20 years ago. And in that 1993 plan, that was stream-oriented only. Now we're taking it and actually looking at all the resources on the aquatic side, which is both the reservoirs and the streams together. But the streams in themselves, and then, let me see if I can find the laser on here. And then we do have 4 of the major reservoirs, and that seemed to be very impactful in some of the conversations we had with the public in developing these plans as well. And then we have Black Hills streams, and that's something that Jake will be talking about here in a little bit. And there were 3 major stream sections or stream watersheds that the task force and groups specifically wanted answers towards or directions on some management implications on. As we looked at those different things, that statewide was about 30,000 foot level, and we start going down to more concentrated levels. And one of the things when we start talking about these plans on the the streams and things that, like on the strategic part, we're probably looking at something that's more about or maybe 2,000 or 5,000 foot level. And when you finally get to that operational side, that's more about the 1,000 foot or even 100 foot maybe level. We're basically starting to drag our feet into the ground and getting work done. And that's some of the things that you'll see in this plan that'll be coming out. This one have some strategic parts to it, but basically operational as well. Strategic-wise, it's going to be very similar to other ones you've probably seen before with the issues, objectives, and strategies. And then operational sense, basically how we approach the problems or the issues, or how we plan to attack some of those things on the real on the ground work type of work. Management-wise, management actions, that's other things you'll see in there, and that could be things such as stocking of fish, maybe regulations or things we might consider that way, or areas that we might look at ways to improve things. I'm going to be talking specifically about Black Hills reservoirs. Jacob, as I said earlier, will be talking about the streams. We look at 4 large reservoirs in the Black Hills. We have Pactola, Deerfield, Sheridan, and Stockade. And then we have about 23 or so smaller reservoirs. And these are ones that are basically about 25 acres in size. Some of these have definitely had some age, derived to them. And we actually have 3 of them that are being dredged out by the Forest Service with some game and fish matching funds thrown in there as well. At this very time, there's 3 lakes in the Black Hills that are dry and getting dredged out at this point in time. So how did we get to this whole thing? Well, if we look at that strategic plan that we're talking about here, it was derived from several different sources. First, there were some issues that were identified by the staff. We sat down as a big group out in the fisheries area, and the aquatic staff came out from Pier, the administrative side, and we went through and kind of identified a whole bunch of different issues for the Black Hills streams and Black Hills reservoirs. We also had issues that were identified by task force groups. This was kind of a new thing that we started on. I'd say there was roughly about a dozen or so participants in both of the areas, the streams and the reservoirs. And we brought them together at different times and what did they really think were issues out there, and kind of let them derive from us what they thought the issues were, and then we had to basically use our expertise, if you want to call it that, on deriving what they said and actually make that into an issue. We always take public comments. There's always different things. An example of this might be the numerous conversations we have with public on the Yellow Grub and Stockade Lake. Very prevalent thing that anglers are always concerned about. That would be an example of a public comment. And finally, you get this refining of the issues, or we've developed all these different things. Now, which ones kind of fit together and where they all meet in place. And with some of that, it's a lot of grinding around and thinking about it on actually where these fit and how they fit into the statewide plan, how they fit into the Black Hills ecoregion plan, but then also how are they going to be basically across say Black Hills reservoirs, but then maybe specific to different waters of those big lakes. So it's those refining of the issues and where they actually fit into everything. And then finalization, that's basically about the spot we're at right now on where we're going to be going with it and where they all fit together, and that'll be in the plan that'll be coming out. Just some examples of the different issues, a general example and then a specific example. The general was years ago we produced this Black Hills fishing guide, which has actually turned out to be a very popular article. But as things change, we've kind of gotten away from from a paper copy and have made it more digital in PDF form, as the world has kind of changed that way. But one of the things that was noted in some of this things was that thing's basically 15 years old now, and it probably needs some updating. Certainly there were some species that have been changed and things that have been moved around, and even some of the work, say, on these new ponds that are basically being redone. So that's probably something that we need to look at too. If we look just at a reservoir-specific example, one of the issues that was brought up that ice fishing access can be really difficult at times in specific waters. And what that basically means is you get a bunch of snow, how do we get to the lake? And we have some examples that we've been working with the counties out there of having them plow into some of the areas so they can get, like, such as an example of that, to the inlet of Deerfield. We have a contract with the county, and so they as they're going along the road, then they'll also just pull in and make a swerve around and plow out some of the snow there so anglers can get down to the lake that way. When we start talking about operational phase, I'm not going to get you hooked up on this, but this goes back kind of in a historic fashion of what we had back in 1993. We took that again as an example of 3 different areas that we basically manage fish with. And now if you remember, that was back just on streams only, but we basically had a put and take option. We had a big trout thing that we started up back in 1993, and then we had another basic example that morphed into itself with some of that, and that was this high stocking rate that we used at a couple different lakes that were experiencing a lot of pressure, and we wanted to kind of address that or try to promote that type of a fishing activity there. And when we developed all those things, we had to take into account what could be provided. So basically, there's only so many fish that can be produced out of a hatchery. And so then we had to actually look at that and where can we allocate those fish. And if we're doing a high stocking rate option, we've got to take some fish from another lake that might be getting fewer fish and stuff like that. And kind of a prioritization of where we move fish. But we've done a lot of things through the years and interviewing the public and finding out what they want. And this the recent report that Cynthia just gave to you on the Black Hills contact survey, that Creel surveys, public meetings, interviewing the people, talking to them at these different avenues gives us an idea of what they want. And basically we've come out now as we have more than just those 3 areas. We probably still have those 3 areas of the put and take option, the big trout, and probably some areas that are going to be high stocking rate options. But we've got other things too. We've got, like Cynthia mentioned, I believe it was about 43 to 45% of the anglers want some trout species other than the rainbow trout that we normally stock. So that might be some things that we can look at that way. And at least by having it in the plan, it allows us that opportunity to explore that type of an avenue. And then also something, at least on the reservoir side, more than stream certainly, is we've seen the anglers take hold and do some of it on their own. But we have multi-species management in a lot of cases where they're moving northern pike or something that way. But there's some times when we've done it as well, say is stocking smallmouth bass into Stockade and into Sheridan Lake. That was on game fish and parks that we actually went in and did that type of thing to try to have a different type of fishery and try to help control some of the panfish populations. As we start looking at some management options that we actually have in the Black Hills, we can have one thing that we call a consistent catch. So if that's something we can have out there, and that's, I think it's kind of shown when we have satisfaction rates up in that, often in that 70%, anglers are saying they're satisfied when we interview them. That's probably about the sort of things they're doing this way is their catch rates are high, they're pretty excited about fishing, and that's basically our consistent catch type of a management option. We have large trout where we put in fish that are bigger than 15 inches. To get from that consistent catch or put and take to get to the 15-inch takes another year in the hatchery for that fish to grow just a few more inches. But that's an option that we have out there. We can stock them high, just a lot of mouths in the lake at certain times. And that's what I described a little bit earlier as a high catch rate, basically. So you can go out and you catch fish really fast. Unique trout. This is a tiger trout that's here. This is one stocking that we've done not too long ago, and it's developed in somewhat of a popular fishery for some of the areas out there. More or less, it's a hybrid fish between brook and brown, but it's something that's very popular with some anglers. Memorable trout. We do something like this, and this is more an example of this might be that. The lake trout in Pactola, where we have a truly memorable type of large fish that we're trying to provide for, or fishery that we're trying to provide for the anglers. Multi-management, like I explained before, we have a lot of different fish in some of these lakes, and that's where one of our options that we have out on the table for us. Natural yield is a term that's used when it's not a stocked fish. It's a way of saying more in a reservoir rather than a wild trout like you might think, as anglers like to refer to that way. Natural yield is basically the same sort of a thing, but it's maybe a term that's more used in the reservoir side of things, that the fish are doing it on their own. They're not hatchery born and produced that way. Native fish, we have some examples of things we've been doing this way. We have an example, the best example I can come up with right off the top of my head is fine scale dace is limited to one lake in South Dakota up until we killed off another lake that had green sunfish in it and actually established a new population. So that's one species that's found in 2 different lakes now, and it's not near as a chance of being extirpated that way. And then we have things such as fish removals. We've done this for a number of years. We have an action item in our reservoirs, especially at Deerfield Lake. If we reach a certain level of biomass in our gill net sets in one summer, we go back in the next spring and start pulling out white suckers because we know they have an impact on how our trout survive and the condition of our trout altogether. And then finally, we have special regulations that we can use. Like this is a largemouth bass and smallmouth bass, or what we call together a black bass regulation, and where we have, this is an example of a 15-inch regulation before they can be harvested out of that lake. So those are different options that we have in the Black Hills reservoirs. Another small graph here, but this is something that you'll see in the back of the plan when it comes out. And I wanted to give you an example. Here this is for Stockade Lake and Sylvan Lake. And one example here is that we have size limits on all black bass to increase the overall size and biomass. So that's basically one of those options that I was telling you that we have on the table. And then also the aeration system is installed and maintained, and that's in there to break up a thermocline, which is a stratification that happens in some lakes when they're in cold water lakes when there's not a lot of wind. And that's one example of using some different things that we've gone through that way, both in a management side of regulation, and then also from a habitat perspective. And then on Sylvan Lake, the thing that we look at there is more just maintaining a family fishery through stocking. So there's a real diversity of things that are going on. A big lake where we have some different management things, but then in this case we're stocking some trout in a put and take fashion. I'll just go through real quick on some of the issues that were identified on some of our major wet waters. Fairly typical in some of our lakes is we're having a lot of different anglers' wishes for the fishery. As one of the persons who was out there contacting some of these anglers, it's very prevalent. You have a lot of I don't say dichotomy, but you have a group of people that want, some of these cool and warm water fish. You have some people that are still out there as the trout anglers, and you got some people out there that want everything. and so that's fairly typical what we see, and so that's the sort of thing that we're looking at as a multi-species management aspect there. And in Sheridan, we pretty much have some of that. We can stock the trout in there still at a catchable size, and they grow very, very fast for us. But that lake is changing. It's one of the things we've noted is it's really becoming more eutrophic, and this might actually be an area where we're able to use something like that aeration system, similar to what we have in Stockade Lake. Jumping into Pactola, we thought we had a diversity of angling groups at Sheridan. It's nothing compared to Pactola. We have some real diehards there. A lot of people that are looking at Pactola fish in basically a trophy component or a trophy size thing. If you were to go out there right now, today, I'm sure there's people out on the ice that are going after trophy lake trout. It's unbelievable how popular that fishery has gotten. It's the only lake that we have in the Black Hills or in the state that has lake trout, and people recognize it, and they like fishing in 150 feet of water and pulling up fish from that deep, and it's unbelievable how popular that is with people. But we also have northern pike and some other things that are going on in there, and the whole dynamics they're going there. Still, our bread and butter for this lake at this point in time is always the catchable rainbow trout that we put in there, and that helps drive some of the system of how probably some of that energy flows into those major predators as well. Some of the things we go through there is reviewing the stocking strategies that we've used. In the last year, we've gone, instead of stocking the same number of fish, we've been putting pulses of fish in at different periods, and that seems to have a little bit of difference and some angler acceptance or excitement that's generated from that as well. We also had a Pactola summit, and that was with Steve Chips and Natalie Scheibel, and she was doing her thesis there on the bioenergetics of the lake itself. And then it's basically getting some informed consent by the public on anything we try to do up there as well. Our idea here is, develop ideas on the stocking changes that we might be able to do, management things that way, and then some evaluation steps at the end of it. And then one of those things involved in that is probably looking at brown trout. Cynthia mentioned that brown trout was one thing that people are looking at as more of a difference in fisheries that might exist. And when I first came on a lot of years ago, brown trout was a pretty popular thing in Pactola, and we got away from it. We had some disease issues that were happening in the hatchery at that time as well on brown trout themselves, and so that made us limit on some of our brown trout, but it also takes longer to raise brown trout and fewer brown trout per area than you can raise rainbows, so it's kind of one of those trade-off areas. We surely need to explore some shore fishing improvement opportunities and issues that way. That's one thing that keeps coming up, and some of the development of the issues that we had with all that was, working with the Forest Service, at Pactola, and developing some sort of maybe better shore fishing, such as docks or things that way of allowing more of that type of thing, or maybe access paths. I guess some of that's all to be developed yet. Hitting our third reservoir that I'm going to talk about, one of the big things up at Deerfield is basically a poor trout condition. That's something that we've noticed years and years and years. The trout, when they were this lake has actually been killed off twice before. That was when we say killed off, that's done with rotenone, and it kills off the fish populations. That was done in conjunction when they were doing some work on the valves and stuff, and so we were able to go in and kill off the lakes. In that sense, but that allowed us to increase the size and have more just of a cold water trout fishery. One of the things we're looking at is identifying the limiting factors in there. There's a certain reason why those fish are maybe getting skinny or not growing as we expect after they get stocked out from the hatchery. Impacts of stocking on reproducing trout. That's one thing that we're looking at that way. When we start looking at when we stock fish in there, we have some resident fish in there to begin with, and Deerfield is a prime example of that. Is that we have reproducing trout that are above and doing it on their own. Some rainbows that are doing that in the spring and making the run up that way. So what impacts are we having when we stock trout in there? That was one issue that came out from the Deerfield work. And the biggie on this one is there's too many rock bass, and something we've talked about before is anglers moving fish around. Well, they move fish of the northern pike, but they also probably think they're moving bluegill or something that way, and they remove rock bass, and their ability to identify species probably hampers us really badly, because these little guys never really grow very big. They're very abundant, and they're very pugnacious in their attitude on how they handle other fish around them. And so some things we've been looking at that way is, removal efforts and doing some, in that sense, it's more of electroshocking or things we can get away with fish that way. And then recently, Gene and I have been discussing if there's any predatory or trophy management sort of things on fish, and what would the biomass need to be of some of these fish to help control, maybe in combination with the removal efforts, to increase that condition of the trout. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jake.
Thanks, Greg. Well, Greg kind of covered our whole process as we identified issues for the Black Hills reservoirs and streams, and then covered the reservoir, so I'll take the stream side now. Now, in our Black Hills streams and our sub-plan, one of the things that you'll find in there, similar to what Greg showed with the reservoir and with the reservoirs and showed different management options, size, that sort of thing, we have our stream management index. And this will be included in the plan, and what this has all our streams essentially in the Black Hills that can be found, And with that, it'll contain specific information such as the watershed that that stream is found in. A lot of times what we have are sampling sites within these streams. It's really not feasible to sample the entire streams within the Black Hills of South Dakota. So what we've done is broken down into stream sites. A lot of these are historic sites that we sample, maybe not necessarily on an annual basis depending on the size of the stream, but we'll sample, and that way we can develop trend data and look at long-term historic trend data for these sites. As well with that, we'll have classifications. So based off what our sampling finds, we'll classify our trout streams based off the fish populations that are sampled during them. So an angler can go into our subplans, our stream subplan, and look at the stream management index, find all the streams, and with that they can find a lot of useful information as far as what we found for our sampling efforts as well as locations. Within that, we've also broken out in our streams plan, similar to what we've done with the reservoirs where we broke out the 4 major reservoirs, we've done that with our 2 major watersheds and written specific plans for those watersheds. The first is Rapid Creek, and this includes Castle Creek. As Greg mentioned earlier in the presentation, we had Castle, Rapid, and Spearfish were our 3 main streams. Castle Creek feeds into Rapid Creek, and there's 2 major dams on that watershed. Castle Creek has Deerfield Dam on it, and then Pactola Dam. And those dams are operated by the Bureau of Reclamation and operated together. So essentially what happens on Castle Creek affects what happens in Rapid Creek. So that's why we've included Castle Creek into the Rapid Creek watershed. And then also Spearfish Creek in the northern Black Hills. Now as far as management goes, we have several different management options. I'll just kind of cover those briefly, but there'll be essentially two main management options. The first one is wild fish. And essentially within that, what we can do is we have our natural yield option, as Greg talked about, where essentially we let that fish population become self-sustaining and essentially provide consistent recruitment and do it themselves. We also have memorable. We have some locations where an example would be Rapid Creek below Pactola Reservoir. We have memorable size fish, larger size trout than we find in a lot of other streams. Because of this, that's a memorable option. We also have unique trout. An example of this would be in Spearfish Creek. We have a population of self-sustaining rainbow trout, one of the only areas in the Black Hills where this happens. So because of that, we have a special regulation on those rainbow trout because it is a unique fishery essentially. Also, we have improvement. So we may see some areas where there might be some environmental factors that limit our trout population at times, or it might be habitat related. So we have areas, but if conditions are ideal, we have consistent wild fish recruitment, but at times they may not be, so we list that as an improvement area. And then also native fish. So as Greg brought up the example on fine scale dace, we actually have a native fish in the Black Hills streams might be the mountain sucker, which is a species of greatest conservation need. And there's a lot of tributary streams that really aren't options as viable fisheries for sport fish. However, they're ideal habitat for these native fish. And because of that, we can manage for that native fish in that area. Now, another management option we have would be hatchery supplemented. Now, these may be streams that are limiting as far as available habitat for sport fish and especially wild fish. And so that may be limited by temperature is one big thing. We have a lot of streams in the Black Hills where at certain times of the year, especially in drought conditions, they just become too hot at portions of the year to sustain trout populations the entire year. So because of that, we go in at times and stock fish just because without that option, there likely wouldn't be a viable fishery there. Now, these stockings, they can be annual or seasonal. An example of one would be a seasonal stocking would be Spring Creek below Sheridan Reservoir. At times during high water, there may be enough water and essentially the right temperatures to allow trout to survive on a year-round basis. However, there's times when that doesn't happen, so we can go in during certain times of the year and stock fish and provide a fishery for that seasonal time. Other areas are annual stocking, such as high-use areas. Some would be campground areas where we have we see high harvest or harvest that may exceed what the stream can actually produce, and so we want to continue to provide opportunity there. So those might be annual stockings. Also, we have species. Our primary species that we stock would be rainbow trout, but Greg talked about how brown trout have been stocked in the past. That's one option that we've looked at. Additionally, tiger trout have been stocked, and they were primarily stocked in the reservoir. However, they have moved. During that time, they did move into the stream as well and provide a unique stocking or a unique species essentially for some of those stream anglers. And then also memorable. So in some areas, our stream populations may not be capable of producing larger sized trout, so we've gone in and stocked larger trout as well, just to provide that larger option for the anglers. And then unique as well. So once again, kind of talking about maybe going back to those tiger trout or brown trout, or depending on what we're looking at, just to provide a little bit different sport fish option for our anglers. Now, just to kind of cover the two major watersheds again, Rapid Creek. So once again, this is including Castle Creek into this. Just to cover that briefly, and then we'll hit Spearfish Creek as well. It's our largest watershed within the Black Hills, and just some of the major issues, just to kind of condense them quick. But a lot of the issues that we see in Rapid Creek watershed are related to natural mortality. And so when I talk about natural mortality, this can mean a lot of different things, but this is essentially some of the things that we notice that can limit our trout populations within Rapid Creek. An example of this would be we see high levels of predation by terrestrial predators, mink in particular, on some areas of our Black Hills streams. And so this can actually limit some of our fisheries. Even though we may not see a whole lot of angler harvest, we see a lot of declines in populations at times due to other aspects. And then habitat as well. A lot of the issues we identified were tied back to available habitat. And this can include anything from habitat improvement projects or just general water rights and how much water we can acquire during certain times of the year. Now, as far as our strategies go, the main thing after we identified all these issues, especially the two kind of big ones there, the natural mortality and habitat, we're trying to identify and mitigate some of those limiting factors. So when we're out working, looking at these different issues, we're trying to identify specifically what they are, so sources of natural mortality or what aspects of the habitat are actually limiting that population, and then ways that we can try and improve that or work to lessen the effects that they may have on our trout populations. Now I'll move on to Spearfish Creek just briefly. It's an unregulated stream in the Northern Hills, and when I say that, what I mean is, unlike Castle and Rapid Creek, there's no major dam on it, and so the flows are more of a natural hydrograph compared to Castle and Rapid, which are highly regulated by those reservoirs and what water is released through those reservoirs. Now, some of the things that we've seen would be, or major issues that we saw would be changes in habitat. Because it is unregulated during times of high precipitation, it can really change a lot. As far as a lot of water that's happening, it can move a lot of material, and it just changes the general morphology of the stream. And so with that change in habitat, that's going to have implications on the trout population, and then also numbers and distribution of trout. I mentioned earlier that we have this unique population of rainbow trout in there. We do have a regulation that requires catch release on that population because it is a unique one. However, some of the issues that were identified was that the current regulation may not be accurately encompassing their entire range and distribution through that stream, and so that's one thing that we will look at. So as far as the strategies for those issues, we'll be studying those movement and numbers, and also evaluating the habitat to see what has changed and what, especially after those high water events, and essentially what that may have the effect on the trout population. So we've talked about these different plans, the Black Hills plan and all these sub-plans on the reservoirs and the streams, so just kind of a brief timeline as we move forward here. So our goal is we'll have draft plans to the Commission and to the public by the end of January. We'll have that public comment period because we certainly want to hear from the public on what their thoughts are, if we've captured all of the input that they provided for us with these plans. So that'll go from February until early March. We'll have updates at the March Commission meeting and Commission review in March as well. And then the goal would be that in April that plans will be open for adoption from the Commission. With that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Greg or Jake?
I have one.
Go ahead, Ken.
We were talking about the stream. I noticed Spearfish Creek in last fall when we were looking at it. It's a really heavy flow, and then we were there right after Christmas, and it's flowing. Is that from all the moisture this last year? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's a very high gradient stream as well. And so if you look, there's not really much of a floodplain, so when we have a lot of water that comes through, it doesn't have a whole lot of area to expand laterally, and so it creates a lot of force, and we actually see it'll move a lot of material. I mean, those
we thought you could almost raft it or something.
Yep, it's actually quite tough to sample. This past summer, actually, due to that high water, we really weren't able to sample Spearfish Creek much at all, just because even just from a safety aspect, it's hard to sample in that one.
Part of that, the mines aren't using as much of it or anything like that, or not so
I mean, we did pick up some flow, correct, from Little Spearfish?
Right. We had a lot of water this last year. Whenever you have that, you're increasing the springs in the Black Hills. The Black Hills doesn't have any glaciers. I mean, they're hills, they're not mountains, is something we need to keep in perspective. And that whole water flow on how things work is very unique in the Black Hills, at least in my mind, where we have groundwater that comes up through seeps and springs. A number of those start coming, and all of a sudden you have some flowing water, and then you have that happen over here, and eventually you build up an amount of water that's going down the area of least resistance, which is down the stream. And you have that happen over and over. Well, as a drought comes along or something, some of those springs might slow up. And then when you have a good rainfall event or something that way, they get recharged basically and start having more flow allowable out of themselves because they're producing more. And what's so unique, spearfish is a great example. You go to a certain point and then it becomes dry. That goes into an area that's called the loss zone. And what happens there is that water comes and it sinks down into the ground again, which is very important because that recharges the aquifer and has it come back up at the headwaters again.
Where's that area?
It's in Spearfish Creek is an example. It happens to all our creeks, basically. In Spearfish Creek, it happens a little bit below Hydro 2, which is like if you drove up the lake or the canyon, you come to a kind of a major dam. You likely saw people fishing there or something because it's pretty popular that way. And there's some flow below it, but it's greatly reduced.
Okay.
Because that area below is where some of that loss zone is going to start occurring. And historically what's happened in spearfish, they take some of that water at that dam area and it goes through basically a tunnel. And that's what comes out and then flows down in spearfish, in the town of Spearfish, to a hydro plant. So it generates electricity but then provides water through the town. So it kind of bypasses some of that loss zone. It was something that developed back in early statehood or pre-statehood.
I know it was beautiful now with it flowing so much.
Good job, guys, real good. And opportunity, I think, probably in this management plan to maybe, we're going to talk about fish stocking 101 next here, but opportunity maybe to kind of help educate the public about those various different characteristics of all that water and why they, a lot of them should have more smallmouth in it, I think, but never mind. That's time for another story. So thanks for all the work, guys. Excellent. Really nice.